Do you think you could run Apple for a decade? Well, before Steve Jobs was CEO, John Sculley was.
Many people think that there couldn't be two things that were further apart than Pepsi and Apple, but in reality, what attracted Steve Jobs to recruit me was that I had been made marketing vice president of Pepsi in 1970 when I was just 29 years old.
This is the taste. This is the test. Pepsi versus Coke, the Pepsi Challenge. Pepsi.
So we said, we can't own reality. Coke is reality, but perception leads reality. I called that experience marketing. And when I explained it to Steve, he said, that's fascinating. He said, I'm building a product at Apple. It's going to come out in about a year called the
Macintosh, the computer for the rest of us.
And it's all about the experience of using a product if you know nothing about technology and being able to do amazing creative things. He said, you've got to come to Apple and teach me how to do experience marketing.
So Steve Jobs recruited John Sculley with one of the most famous pickup lines in Apple history. This is the Dynabook. Alan Kay invented this before computers looked like tablets, before they looked like laptops. If you don't know Alan Kay, you should look him up.
Steve had recruited Alan to Apple back in the early 1980s. And Alan said, well, it takes about 20 years for true innovation to percolate from invention all the way through to potentially a successful commercialized product. And as we thought about that, we said, gee, there must be a lot of really cool things that are going on in research labs now. Multimedia, interactivity, simulation, wireless, all these ideas were being inspired by talented people at the MIT Media Lab. So we took those ideas. I created this concept called the Knowledge Navigator.
Jill Gilbert is calling back.
Great, put her through.
Hi, Mike. What's up?
Based on the ideas that largely that Alan Kay had inspired me by taking me to see the Media Lab, and Alan knew how to connect the dots on these things, but I knew how to market. And so I went to George Lucas and I said, George, isn't there a way we can simulate these things of what a computer could be like in 20 years, showing what we thought could be possible within 20 years, open people's eyes that we weren't at the middle of an industry or the end of an industry. We were at the beginning of an industry.
John Sculley oversaw a lot of really great developments at Apple. The Apple II, he oversaw the PowerBook line of computers, which were hugely successful. And more interesting to me is he oversaw the development of the first Newton.
What is Newton? Newton is digital. Newton is personal. Newton is magic. Newton is as powerful as a computer. Newton is as simple as a piece of paper.
The Apple Newton was an amazing handheld computer which came out in 1993 and then was subsequently canceled by Steve Jobs in 1998 after he came back to Apple.
I didn't start Newton. It was actually started by Steve Sackerman. It was going to be a handheld product that would have a pen interface, touchscreen, and in those days that was pretty far out there because there really were no touchscreens. And I talked about the future was going to be these handheld products that would have no keyboard, that would be able to communicate wirelessly, that would have an intelligent agent inside of them, that would be able to do smart things. And I never mentioned the name Newton, but I said that this was going to be a gigantic industry, and these products would eventually be sold in the billions. And there was just like, complete incredulous response by people, particularly the press, because they said, this is ridiculous. What do you mean you're going to sell handheld products that communicate wirelessly and that don't have any keyboards, and they're going to be over $1 billion a year?
Expectations were so high for the Newton. especially for the handwriting recognition, which was not quite ready by the time they shipped it. It could recognize, if you wrote carefully, it could recognize your handwriting like 80% of the time, but that last 20% was just killer for the product.
You just have to appreciate how incredibly talented the team were. I mean, these were Apple's superstars. I mean, these were people who had developed things on the Macintosh that no one thought was possible. Steve Capps, brilliant. Larry Tesler, brilliant. James Joaquin. I mean, these are incredibly talented people. Ike Nassy. You couldn't get a better team than we had on the Newton. So you can imagine the frustration when the product couldn't render the paragraph software successfully.
Natural computer handwriting recognition was still pretty much a dream at this point. It was something you would do in like a lab. It really was the cutting edge of technology, and this is kind of a precursor to how computers understand speech and everything else.
How much learning do these things really do? I've been trying for the last hour to get it to recognize the word Newton, and it doesn't even try. It just turns it into a graphic. And I've changed my preferences and checked all that stuff. I've been working with it for many hours.
And people started to make jokes about the handwriting recognition. And here you've got some of the most brilliant computer scientists ever doing breakthrough stuff that no one has ever seen before, and we're getting slammed in the press, because the handwriting recognition didn't work that well.
What we do know is that the process by which Newton gets better recognition in your handwriting is a team effort.
It's just like knocking the wind out of you. The challenge with Newton was not the concepts or the vision or the team. The challenge was that we were just way ahead of the curve of what technology could do. Remember, there was no digital cell phones. There was no World Wide Web. When Apple created Macintosh, when Apple created Newton, we were still an entrepreneurial company. We were huge risk takers. People were dreamers. One of the things that Steve Jobs was particularly unique at was his ability to recruit incredibly amazing people and to inspire them to do things that they never imagined that they could do. And even after Steve left, that culture that he really created at Apple still permeated the organization. And so Newton was built by people who had been on Steve's original team, and they understood that you have to take big risks. And you're not always going to be successful, but you'll learn.
This is a computer you write with, right? You can write with it, it can recognize your handwriting, you can also write little notes on it, it organizes, it captures ideas, and it communicates.
The reality was in the early 1990s, this software wasn't powerful enough and the hardware wasn't powerful enough, and it was really going to take ultimately about 15 years for the hardware to get powerful enough to be able to do the things that you really wanted to be able to do in software. None of us were smart enough to realize it was going to take that long. We thought maybe a couple of years, maybe 5 years, but no one ever thought it was going to take 15 years because it wasn't until 2007 that the first iPhone came out.
By the time it was canceled, it had actually got pretty well developed, and it was the culmination of a lot of vision, a lot of the history of what people thought computers should be or would be was embodied in this one device.
What a lot of people don't realize is that the Newton was one of the most profitable products that Apple ever had at the time. Everyone said, gee, Newton failed. But Newton was also the reason why ARM ended up being a commercial product. Apple bought 43% of ARM. It was a research project that came out of Acorn.
I believe last year they passed the 100 billionth ARM processor shipment through their partnership network. So it's become a huge force in the world of computing.
Apple ended up actually selling their 43% of ARM for about $800 million and used that to keep Apple going, and to part of it was used to buy Next and bring Steve Jobs back to Apple.
I asked John what he thought about the fan love that Newton gets from its users even today.
Well, it used to surprise me, but I've had so many people over the years come up and tell me they still have an original Newton and they still use it. Just the amazing talent of people like Steve Capps is so inspiring to me. I mean, of course, people know who Steve Jobs is and was, and So those are legendary figures. But there are people like Steve Capps who had as much impact on what became our future as any of these people who are probably more famous. I do feel really good that we paid attention to so many of those things back in the 1980s, because they did end up being important in the 1990s and in the last decade.
I asked John if he thought we had arrived at the Knowledge Navigator.
It's pretty well there. I remember when Walt Mossberg was sort of giving his summation of the 2 decades he had at the Wall Street Journal, and he said, let me list the 10 most important things that I saw during my time at the Wall Street Journal. And Walt had on that short list the Newton.
There was a reason that John Sculley and Steve Jobs got along at first. They have a lot in common in terms of vision, and they both want to make beautiful products, and John Sculley understood that about Steve, so it's too bad that they couldn't get along.
You've got to believe in something. I mean, creating these products is all about having strong points of view, strong beliefs, and you also have to be flexible enough to know that sometimes you're going to be wrong, and then you got to reset your opinion.
As I was leaving, John asked to see my Newton, which I brought along an original Newton as a prop. He said it had been a while since he'd seen one, so I let him keep the Newton. I also gave him one of these great shirts by Frank Orlando. So these shirts are available in the link below, and I really encourage you to head down there. And also there's a link to my subscription site, Folklore. If you sign up there, you get access to the full 1.5-hour documentary, Love Notes to Newton, which tells the story about the Newton and the people who love it. Plus, you'll have access to the long form of these interviews. This interview on YouTube is about 10 minutes long, so there's like a lot more stuff that John Sculley said. Please don't hesitate to let me know what your thoughts are, and if you have any feedback or improvements, you can let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, everybody, and keep the green.
So there you go. I want to again thank John for spending the time with me, and I think this interview could lead many to a new perception of John Sculley and stimulate further research and discussion on his years running Apple Computer. I'd like to close with a quick quote from a New York Times article dated October 16, 1993, by John Markoff. There's a bit of criticism in the article, but the title and this quote really stand out. The title is Visionary Apple Chairman Moves On. The quote is, "His contribution to the field was significant," said Nicholas Negroponte, the director of the Media Laboratory at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He can almost single-handedly be credited with America's re-entry to consumer electronics.